All right, another thing been wanting to talk about is it's something that could be seen as egotistical. It might please those who think I'm egotistical anyway, because the subject is kind of how I became good at something that I can demonstrate that I'm good at, programming, and also logic, which I can also demonstrate, but um, in the sense that if someone understands logic, I can demonstrate it. Programming, I can demonstrate it whether you understand programming or not. I can just show you a program, various other ways. And but I think it's good. People often get down on you if you're good at something. I think Earl, it occurred to me, Earl might have talked about this, but I'm not sure. People get down on you when they think you're good at something. They also get down on you if you admit you think you're good at it. So, having said that, I have a learning method, the way I think the brain works when it's learning. And it could be, and this method has worked for me very well. Now, it's worked on me in many things. I've used on many things, but some things it works better than others. It's worked particularly well in programming. Now, that could be because the learning method is general purpose, and I have just my inherent nature makes me more able to figure out the elements of programming. The other possibility is that my learning method is actually lends itself especially well to subject matters like programming and logic. All right. I find it somewhat general. I find that other people learn in what looks like a similar sequence, set of pattern of learning. And so that probably, if they consciously followed this pattern, they could do better with their learning. All right. So, my belief with learning is related to the idea of reductionism. I noticed that a weird thing when I was studying Latin in high school, I blew my mind, was that in Latin there's no spaces or punctuation. They just strung it all together. To me, it blew my mind that sentences are like older than words. The writing was in the sentence form. The word was not broken out, just like parts of a word sometimes become a word, or you use that part, breaks off, you put it in another word. Well, that's the language got broken down over time. So it kind of starts whole and continuous, and the pieces are broken down over time. So when we break concepts down into axioms, and then we assume, well, the world's built of axioms. No, the world was built of that stream, and you broke it down to the axioms. Now, granted, if you've done that, you want to say, well, if I've done a good job, I can build it back up out of the axioms. Fine. But you might have missed some parts. To get those axioms, you might have put some real world ideas on a lathe, and there's bits of material that are shavings on the floor, below the lathe. And now you're not going to be able to rebuild it because you've thrown away certain parts. So anyway, what you start with is all of this cloud of information. In other words, what you start with is confusion. So confusion is a state you want to repair, but it's a positive state for learning. As a matter of fact, you have to, my theory is, and what I do myself, is you have to get yourself into a state of confusion in order to learn something really well. It's like if you want to learn an area really well, you can't get directions to your destination and then memorize those. That might seem very effective to your goal if that's the only place you ever want to go. But if you really want to learn that neighborhood really well, you need to just go get lost in it, get confused, get turned around. And as you just let that soak in, slowly things will appear to be the case. It'll be like, oh, I'm in that, I think I go this way. You'll start to have these feelings. Something will appear to be the case, right? Your brain naturally does that. It has pattern machinery, and we'd like to explain that with mathematics and stuff, but basically it's going to be a chemical explanation, like how does a computer work? It's going to be something like that. And then we don't necessarily have to, right now, come up with an explanation of exactly how this pattern machine works. We can imagine some now that we have computers, but it works differently. Let's just say we don't really know. Let's just admit we don't know enough to say exactly how it works. But it does do pattern recognition, and it's not at all that surprising that it can do that in general. It's collecting information. We see that it's surfing. It's routing the energy from this information in a highly intricate and specially crafted and built way. So sure, it has a way of getting this pattern recognition. That's the part I'm now calling illusion in my illusions exist theory of information, right? But it's really just this Gestalt feeling of how things appear to be the case. Then that's what we reduce, and we break what appears to be the case down into information about why, what happened to make that appear to be the case. We had a blue balloon and it looks green. Why? Well, there was a light that was the color that made it look green, because in the shading and everything was set up so that it looked green. That is the information that explains what we get. So if I'm learning a new computer technology, I'm not likely, I don't think I've ever typed in the old days, they would have a magazine, you could type in the source code and stuff. In recent years, just recently learned AngularJS, was it maybe yesterday actually, I went through this whole book of AngularJS. It had sample code you could get from the net, so I got it down and tweaked it. In general, that's because I was jamming to learn it. And what I will still do now to really learn it is I will let myself get a little confused. I'll go ahead and instead of being perfectly careful, I'll try something and see if it breaks, see how it works. And as the confusion comes together, I'll learn my way around. Then I'll look at the way around I've learned, and I'll find principles that help me not have to remember the whole territory, but just remember rules that tell me how to get somewhere else from where I am, these abstractions, right? And then I'll try to rebuild what I see, what I think is the case from those abstractions. And if I can get everything, then I have a good set of abstractions, and I can let the confusion go. The cloud that appears to be something can go, and I rely on these abstractions. Now, you might see how that approach works best with philosophy and logic, because they are abstractions. So, it works really well. You can make clean transformations from a cloud of information when it's in a logical domain to the abstract information, and you can completely recreate the information from the information abstraction. So, how does that work when you're trying to learn how to play the guitar? Well, I just pick up an instrument and I will play with it, but I'm limited how good I could be, but I don't think I'd be any better by any other technique. Are there certain things like maybe human interactions with this confusing, it's just not quite right, where the way you really have to learn something is you have to keep on your path, vary from it only a little bit? Is there maybe something evolutionarily where animals, this is one approach to life, is no, don't get lost in the neighborhood, that's dangerous, just go to your destination. Once you know your destination so well, that's no big deal to go an extra block over to a little shop, then do that, and do that for 5 and 10 years, just learn places one at a time and go where you're meant to go, and don't create this chaos that I like. But if that's the case, I don't think it's just that it's me personally. I think it's because there's this time in history now where some of us see how much the world has to change, and we want to be a part of that change. And to be a part of the change, I'm sure this is how you have to learn it. This is how activists have to learn about politics. Let it confuse you. And then once you start to have an appearance, go ahead and start reducing that for the facts that you could abstract that would explain that appearance. But then confuse yourself again and go, maybe this whole appearance is wrong, and try to see if you can focus differently and get a different appearance and break that down and then compare the things you've broken down that would explain both of those and see which ones overlap, right? And just keep doing this. And I believe this is the way we learn things for the purposes of change.